Well, hello, this is Anthony Parent of IRS Medic, and this podcast today was sparked by this comment I put on Keith's group, American Expatriates for Residency-Based Taxation. Very simple question I asked. Someone who created an expat tax question groups just remarked it is rare for Americans overseas to owe taxes to the U.S. For our firm, this is not true. Most of our clients will still owe some U.S. tax. Of course, the tax prep fees to calculate that amount are obnoxious. I'm sorry, we can't do too much about that. And so I'm just curious if if it is just my market segment or if it's actually rare for Americans overseas to owe taxes. And this comment generated a fantastic reply from Laura Snyder, who is joining us today. We have a special guest joining us, Keith and John today. We have Laura Snyder, and she is the president of seatnow.org. Stop extra. Wait, what does that stand for? What does that stand for?
Stop extraterritorial American taxation.
There we go. That's what it is. So thanks for joining us today, Laura.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Red. And along with Laura, we have our regular guest, Keith Redmond, consulate to and advocate to the Americans overseas, along with John Richardson of Citizenship Solutions. So we're going to get into it, and really where we want to start, which again, this comment generated 176 comments, and so what Laura sent me a link to, it was this. This was the compliance challenges for Americans abroad. This is the most serious problem, number 9, it gets from the Taxpayer Advocate, who's looked into this. And this has some pretty good stats on this. And I'll just get to the point where we found this. Laura, you found the stat. You said it's 60% of Americans go through all of this nonsense in order to prove that they don't owe any tax, but it ends up being 40% who do owe tax. Anything you want to add on to that? Is that what you would say is going on here? About 60% of U.S. expats have to spend gobs of money to prepare returns just to prove they don't owe anything to the IRS.
Yeah, if you scroll to page 122, you'll see the chart.
Okay, 122. Okay, great. Okay, great. Thank you. Let me circle in on that. 122. Keep going. Oh, is this it?
No, it's a bar chart.
It's a bar chart. That it?
I think
there. All right. International, domestic versus international taxpayers who filed reporting no tax liability. Okay, so that's what we have here. So this little green part is those who live in the U.S., those who file and to pay just to say, hey, look, I don't owe anything. But look at that. 58.6% of U.S. filers overseas don't have to pay taxes. And look at it's interesting. We had some higher years there. In 2019, it was 67.3% had no tax due. Any idea why that was higher, Laura, at all?
No. I don't have any idea why. But I would say what I found, there are a couple of things I found interesting about the publication of this chart. The first one is that Karen Alpert has already, on different occasions, taken publicly available IRS data and made her own calculations as to what percentage of the returns would show no tax owed. And but this was being done independently using publicly available IRS data. And this is the first time I'm aware of that the National Taxpayer Advocate or anybody with access to non-public IRS data has confirmed basically what our own calculations were saying, which was that it hovers around 60% of returns filed from outside the United States show no tax owed. And now why it's higher for one year than another year, I don't know. Maybe John or Keith have an idea about that.
Yeah, and I mean, I would just say for myself, I was thinking, the transition tax was part of 2017 reform, and it popped up, but so I'd expect this number to go down. But it actually went up. I would expect this number to go down, but it actually went up. So I really have no clue myself. What is driving that? Maybe John or Keith do have some ideas why the number went up now is going down. Maybe Keith, you have your pulse on what's going on. So I guess this would be people overseas making less money. Oh wait, no, I'm sorry. No, people overseas. starting to make more money than they did in 2019.
Well,
Um,
and I think it's not just making more. You mean as far as paying tax to the paying monies owed to the IRS?
yeah, because what we're
Because
seeing
if
is,
you're just making more money, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be paying the IRS because you always have that foreign tax credit. It just depends on the person's profile. So if your financial center of gravity, let's say, is in France, and you have PFIX or anything else, that could be, or you're employed, you're self-employed, etc. That could up the possibility of having to pay to the IRS. Just
yeah,
earning more money doesn't necessarily make it that you would be owing the IRS. It's
yeah,
that unearned income that really can get you,
yeah.
I think
So
I,
or
I
that,
think John.
phantom income, as John calls it. The phantom income, like with the transition tax and so forth.
and yeah, just to point out something here too, and I have this little footnote right here. One stakeholder relayed that an individual had to pay an entire month's salary to have her return prepared.
That's about
Uh,
right. Yeah.
and that's right, right. And oftentimes, again, just to show that you have no tax due. And this is where what I'm thinking about right now, and what's going through my mind right now is something that John or the great John Richardson said so many years ago. He said this. He said the greatest victim of citizenship-based taxation is actually the IRS. And John, I think I have the perfect segue that would bolster your argument here when I look at this, because Laura said, because what I asked Laura before the show started, up at top, it said this is issue number 9 of importance for the taxpayer advocate. I said, well, what are the other issues? And then she goes, oh, just search this. And so I have the other issues, the 2023 most serious issues encountered by taxpayers. And I want to go through something. And I said, well, I think I see the problem very clearly, because here's the problems that the IRS, overall, this is just not expats. This is for all taxpayers. Here's the problem they have. The processing delays that frustrate taxpayers awaiting a refund and other actions. The IRS has problem hiring and recruiting and training staff. The IRS does not provide clear and timely information to the public, causing confusion and frustration, complicating agency oversight. Telephone and in-person service, return preparer oversight, identity theft. And then here we go, online account access for taxpayers and tax professionals. International is a problem, along with compliance challenges for abroad, and then with appeals. And I want to work backwards. I'm going to work backwards from this, because when I saw this really made me think that actually, when you think of the victimization of the IRS, why they can't get out of their own way, it's because of citizenship-based taxation, because they're doing things they have no business doing, because it's far, far too complicated for the IRS to do. So many of the IRS's resources are wasted on this. So the first issue is here, appeals. Okay, the taxpayer advocate says, hey, look, appeals is a problem. Despite some improvements, many taxpayers and tax professionals continue to perceive the IRS Independent Office of Appeals as insufficiently independent. Well, let me tell you why. Let me tell you why I continue to perceive the IRS Independent Office of Appeals as insufficiently independent, because they are not. The IRS Office of Appeals is entirely not independent. And here's what I know for a fact, that if you are assessed an FBAR penalty, your appeals agent is not the one determining whether or not you're willful or non-willful. No, 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 no. That goes off to the national FBAR coordinator, who is the decider, taking away that independence of the appeals officer. So in this situation here, we have the problem with appeals is that appeals, we know, when it comes to foreign informational reports, are not independent. And we also know this for a fact. IRS Office of Appeals will change they will make your determination on what kind of taxpayer you are. If you are a small taxpayer who doesn't have a lot of defense, they will attack you incredibly difficult. If you are a larger corporate taxpayer, they're very lenient. They're incredibly lenient. And so, John, would you say that appeals might be one of those issues where that the administering the citizenship-based taxation makes appeals completely, or not completely, but it does not help their independence?
Well, I don't understand how an internal appeal within the IRS bureaucracy could be independent under any circumstances. I mean that that's the whole reason you have outside courts, and that is to provide to create a firewall, right, between the administrator and the person overseeing the administrator, right? I mean, maybe that's a little bit strong, but I don't think that there's a strong sense that in an IRS appeal that it has any high degree of independence.
Yeah. Right. And so the IRS Office of Appeals is supposed to be that independent agency that's supposed to weigh the merits of cases and say, hey, look, this case is going to go to litigation. Basically, do a pretrial of the case. So in order not to waste taxpayers' time and to come up with solutions that actually work to administer the code. But in this case,
I mean, it may be that in certain circumstances, for certain people, it does work well. Okay, for precisely that reason. But I mean, if we're talking about, um, a way to get some sort of objective, independent, third-party help with interaction with the tax system, no, I don't think you're going to get that.
right. And I don't think the IRS. I mean, this is what the IRS appeals had to take shortcuts because again, why do they have to take these shortcuts? Because they can't possibly administer this monster. They can't possibly do it, and so now shortcuts are taken, and the IRS Office of Appeals simply isn't. It's just simply not independent, really. When it comes to foreign penalties, not at all, not at all. And I would give it a 0 out of 10 on independence. They are the opposite of independent. They are just there to back up the IRS marching orders for the penalty bonanza. You might get a little bit of something, but it is incredibly difficult. And again, they're taking their marching orders from someone who isn't independent, and it's pretty sickening. I do want to move. I'm going to move on to the next one, and this is really this is the one that we're talking about today. This is the report I have up here. This is the one we're talking.
Anthony, can I ask you a quick question just because I don't know? Just real quick on the appeals thing.
Yeah,
Do you have to go to that appeals process before you go to tax court?
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely, Keith. So
Okay.
what's required is you need to exhaust your administrative remedies in order to go to tax court. And even go to district court too. You're going to have a problem if you don't exhaust everything you have, which adds more time, more expense. And by the way, the IRS Offices of Appeals, she doesn't mention this. Despite some improvements, many taxpayers and professionals continue to perceive the IRS Independent Office of Appeals is sufficiently independent. I would also say this: there's not even any of them. I mean, it takes forever to get an appeal assigned while the IRS is doing all these other things. Your IRS appeals agents have to handle everything from collections matters to assessment matters, everything under the sun. And there's incredibly few appeals officers, and those are there simply haven't had the background and training to be the ones that, if you asked me 15 years ago what I thought of the IRS Office of Appeals, I'd say pretty good. I would say pretty good. They were really helpful in finding solutions that would work. And that's what I would say. Now they're just another hoop to go through that may give you some help, but don't expect them to actually look at it fairly. They're really there to advocate for the government side, not to look at your side. They're just, it's basically lip service. So I'm incredibly disappointed to see what has happened to the IRS Office of Appeals. They're just not anything what they used to be. Yeah, go ahead.
In the case of international taxpayers, all right, I don't think it's really possible for them to deal with this stuff objectively and fairly because they don't understand the context, and I mean, it's fairly obvious that they don't understand the issues, and I'm not dumping on them in any way, shape, or form. Very few people do understand,
right?
So, what you have is an agency that is completely overworked at the breaking point, dealing with the stuff that they presumably do know how to deal with. And then you get this other junk, thrown at them, which is, no pun intended, but completely foreign in every respect. And, what are they really supposed to do? I mean, I don't sense, maliciousness on the part of the IRS in general. What I sense is just a sense of not knowing how to deal with the situation at all. And nowhere is this, I think, more clear than you have on your screen. We've been talking about compliance challenges, but more importantly, I think, is the international penalty regime.
And by the way, so what we're going through is we're going over what the Taxpayer Advocate has identified as the worst problems that the IRS has. And we're only on one part of the page right here, folks. All three of these all have significant problems when it comes to U.S. with people with income or assets overseas. All three of these are directly impacted. The IRS is overwhelmed in appeals. And I mean, this is the thing. Like new laws are passed all the time. You have the employee retention credit law was passed, right? And the IRS says, okay, we're going to have a big aggressive campaign for this, and we're going to go after people who fraudulently claim these things. But what happens? Well, that's when you're dealing with hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential refunds or credits that people can get. Guess what? They're going to lawyer up. Guess what? They're going to go to the IRS Office of Appeals. Now you're an appeals agent. You thought you knew everything. Oh, wait, no. There's a brand new law out there, and there's not terribly a lot of guidance. You have the IRS saying one thing about what it means, but then you look at the actual law, it seems to mean something else. And so this is another thing. They're getting thrown this. And I would just say, as you were talking, John, one of the things I would say, if you wanted to give me a nightmare, waking up one day and finding out that I'm an IRS appeals officer, that would be a complete nightmare. There is so much to know. And I know my world. You have to know about nonprofits. You have to know everything. You have to know everything about the tax code. And there is simply no way. And when you're throwing this international stuff, hey, their life would be a lot easier if they said, you know what, we have enough to do without worrying about any of these international issues. And so as you're right, John, so the compliance challenges for taxpayer abroad, we're talking about, 60% of people filing returns just to prove they have no money owed, people paying up to a month of salary to get it done because they don't understand it because it's so complicated. And then we end up with this. The IRS's approach to international informational return penalties is draconian and inefficient. And I would say this, okay, I would say you're giving yourself a compliment by calling it draconian. That's not accurate. Draconian would be an improvement over what we have. Draconian comes from the Greek, or not Greek, but the Byzantine Empire. In the Byzantine Empire, Dracos was the creator of many awful laws, none of which are as awful as what we have. So this is actually them giving themselves a compliment by calling it draconian. Inefficient. It's not even. The IRS takes years. When you have someone who's assessed a foreign trust penalty, and it takes 4 years to get that foreign trust penalty removed because they never had a foreign trust, that might be a little inefficient. So that's what we're seeing here. And so, Laura, are these some of the issues that you guys are tackling now in seat now? Maybe now this would be a great time for you to tell us a little bit about SEAT and what you guys are doing.
Well, SEAT, we're focused on changing the system itself to stop the fact that Americans who live outside the United States are targeted by U.S. tax rules and subject to very penalizing rules that no one else is subject to, not people who live in the U.S. and not everybody else who lives outside the U.S. So our purpose is to educate on those issues and with the goal of getting the laws changed.
Right on. All right, we'll be talking about that too. This is, I think, I have I've been talking to. We have a potential solution to this problem. By the way, as I'm going down into this, don't get totally depressed here, because there is a potential solution here, and I might be trying to agitate all of you to take some action, because I do believe there is a challenge, and as you kind of see what is revealed. So let's go up to the other problems, like online account access for taxpayers and tax professionals. This is a terrible problem when we're trying to deal with it, because this is actually married in with identity theft. If you're really looking for a true sense of misery, try to have a U.S. client overseas who's a victim of identity theft. Oh my, oh my. There are
Wow.
that if you want to know a problem, that is such a problem because many of these identity theft issues can only be solved with an in-person visit to an IRS field office.
That can't be
So,
done overseas because
yeah,
they
that
close their
cannot.
field offices
Yeah. So,
How
wow.
often
So,
does
Keith,
that
they
happen? How often does that happen compared to identity theft of
in the
people living in the
States.
U.S.?
Yeah,
What's
you
that's
know,
the
true.
I'm not entirely
Good point.
sure, but I do have one client who has identity theft and he lives overseas. And the other issue too is that when we're looking for online account access for taxpayers and tax professionals, it's gotten better a little bit, but honestly, what is absolutely maddening is that I'll file my power of attorney with the IRS, the CAF unit, and I go online for online access. And guess what? It's not generating it. So now I have to put a call into the IRS. That's going to take, one of their agents in order to get the information that I'm looking for, that I should have access to. I mean, it's so difficult. These two things together, identity theft and then not having the access to be able to repair it, the case gets flagged and you can't really do anything to resolve the issue. And additionally, I don't even know if I don't even wait. Did this even make it on there? Compliance challenges for taxpayers abroad? Because when you're dealing with people who get their passport revoked because they owe over $50,000 and are considered delinquent. Well, if you have an identity theft, good luck trying to resolve your problem. Good luck. There's like, sorry, we can't resolve your problem because you and I have been identity theft and you can't resolve it. So you're just sitting there. I mean, you're just in this hell. So it's like, what do you do in that situation? So those are the things that are, these are the problems that are impacting those overseas and those with international income so drastically more awful. Like if you think the IRS is awful, wait till you have things overseas. It's an entirely different level of awful. And I think the awfulness is by design. It's specifically because everyone overseas has no representation. This is what happens. This is the natural result of what happens with taxation without representation. You end up with these brutal things that are even punitive to the IRS.
Yeah. If I may add, also there's another
Absolutely, Keith.
problem. Yeah, there's another problem that's not addressed in the slide that you're showing that people tend to forget. Oftentimes, many times, the individual who is the American overseas, believe it or not, English is not their first language. And so that just adds another layer of complexity in getting anything taken care of,
Yeah, and I
vis-a-vis
think that
tax compliance or when there's any type of problem. I come across that all the time.
there you go. Well, Keith, here you go. The taxpayers abroad also have no ability to access free IRS return preparation assistance. And it's like, so, and these are in countries where, hey, look, English might not be my first language. I might not be making all the money in the world. If you were in the US, you could, maybe your public library might be doing a volunteer income tax assistance where you're in tax counseling for the elderly. These are programs that allow people without a lot of income to be in compliance. And they did. Oh, wait, the IRS did conduct virtual training at 22 military bases in Europe and Asia. And did establish some on military bases, which is great. But they're not accessible to anybody but those who have, who can
Right.
get into the military base. So, hey, way to go there. That's wonderful. And that's just so
Right.
wonderful there, isn't that?
And the other problem with the military bases is all those people, their financial centers of gravity are in the United States. They're not in their
Yeah.
resident
And
countries.
that's right,
So,
which is right, which someone who's in the military, God bless you, but your situation is usually unless you marry someone and have some assets and maybe like what happens, the typical guy who's a military guy will become our client is in Germany, falls in love, decides to live and stay in Germany, he starts making a career. That's usually what happens. But while they're still in the military, it's actually a pretty simple, straightforward return. It's not that bad. And that's actually one of the things that we saw in our post was some people like, what are you talking about? Taxes are a piece of cake. Why are you guys out there fear mongering all of this? Taxpayer, you guys are making way too much of a big deal out of this. It's not that bad. Just file your taxes, right? But that's when they can, and that's the thing, you can have incredibly simple returns overseas with it's just an additional schedule and you're all set.
Well, you've talked about this in prior discussions, Anthony. You talked about how the more your financial center is outside the United States, the more complicated U.S. tax return is going to be. And this is generalizing, obviously, but I have to imagine that people who are on military bases, generally they're there temporarily, and generally their financial centers do remain in the United States.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Everything there's they are just temporarily overseas. That's all it is. Here we have that other point. There is, what Keith was mentioning before. There are no in-person assistance center options outside the United States and Puerto Rico. And this problem, I mean, again, when you have a tax identity problem, you need to go to a service center, and there are none overseas. There used to be offices in Beijing, Frankfurt, London, and Paris. But the IRS closed it, and there is no footprint for in-customer customer service. By the way, it's not great in the U.S. The customer service is incredibly difficult, but eventually you can get in there. And now the IRS has there is no plan, zero plan to offer in-person assistance. Again, the people who have to deal with the most complicated aspect of the tax code, of the most complicated tax code in the history of history, get the least amount of help. Here it is, the least amount of help. And they're like, yep, well, we're not even going to bother trying to fix it. We're just going to kind of continue on the way we're doing. So, I mean, these are some serious problems. And now I'm going to go back to the other serious problems that we have. We talked about that, we talked about that identity theft. And then, here's something that comes up a big time too, right? Return preparer oversight. Why am I doing all these streamlined disclosures? Why do we do all these streamlined disclosures? Well, sometimes the person is preparing their returns themselves and they're using TurboTax and they couldn't understand the prompts, which I understand, because certain things are terms of art, which you would not necessarily know unless you're a taxpayer. And so what happens is we have these incredibly complicated returns for people to do who are given the least amount of service. And there's a tax industry out there, and there are some very good ones, and there are some very good ones some competitors of mine who I'd easily recommend, like Online Tax Man. He's wonderful. I love him. He was on the channel last week. We were talking about foreign trusts. But a lot of these foreign preparers, they are it is a bit of a club. It is a bit of a club, and it's not for everybody. You have to be focusing on the international aspect, and it's such an additional level of complexity, and really not anything against tax preparers. It's just way too much for everybody to understand, and that's really why you want to have someone who specializes in these returns. Really think about it. You have to specialize in this. And so how do you oversight these returns when, by the way, the IRS doesn't even know their own stuff either? They're not exactly clear on their own rules. So how does the IRS give proper oversights to preparers when they're incredibly unsure themselves? And then they're intentionally vague, which is IRS transparency. This is one, we talked about this a few weeks ago. This was in December. We talked about this. We talked about passive foreign investment companies. And John, he was amazing. He went through this step by step. And we concluded that foreign mutual funds in of themselves by alone are not passive foreign investment companies. What would be very helpful if the IRS gave guidance to that. However, if you look at the instructions to Form 8621, the place where to report your PFIX, you will find something interesting. If you do a control find for mutual, you will find 0 results. And in fact, if you go to the IRS website to find any guidance on whether a foreign mutual fund is a PFIC, you will not find it. John, and you said there was one letter the IRS had on the PFIX. And what was that letter regarding that? And I think that was the one thing.
Well, it really had nothing at all to do with the issue. What it was a situation where it was actually came out of Canada, where a Canadian tax resident died, and part of his or her estate contained mutual funds, which contained U.S. securities. Okay, so the issue was whether there was a U.S. estate tax exposure on that, because as we know, U.S. securities are U.S. cited as assets. And I think I'm correct. My memory's not 100% on this, but I think that the answer came back that no, because the U.S. securities are owned inside a Canadian mutual fund. Okay, they aren't owned directly. And then there was sort of a one-off line saying, and oh, by the way, uh, this particular blocker, okay, this Canadian mutual fund actually qualifies as a corporation, okay, which is what gives it the status of being a blocking mechanism, a foreign corporation. And from that point, they all went crazy because it says, oh my God, look, mutual funds are corporations, right? Therefore, foreign mutual funds are foreign corporations. Therefore, oh my God, they must be passive foreign
Oh,
investment corporations. So all this total absolute bullshit, okay, comes from a letter from the IRS completely outside the context of the actual issue. And my personal view of this is that that should have been completely ignored, or at least sequestered into the context that the whole question was raised, instead of creating a new industry, right? The great PFIC fund bonanza, which is, I think, largely what happened. And the question is, why did this happen? Well, it's because the tax compliance community decided to extend uh, the discussion in that particular letter very broadly into the conclusion that therefore these things are foreign corporations, which is what you need to leverage it into a passive foreign investment company or corporation. So, I mean, I blame the tax compliance industry for this.
Yeah, we certainly have. Yeah, no, we have now backed away from that, and so we are not treating. If a client does want us to treat it like a mutual fund, we'll file that 8621. But if a client doesn't want to treat their foreign mutual funds as a PFIC or ETF, hey, an ETF is a fund. A mutual fund is a fund. They are not corporations. And that is it's difficult to have a passive foreign investment company when it's a fund. It's not a company. And that's where we're at. And this is what I would say is that the IRS knows these 8621s are coming in. They know what's happening, and the IRS knows they can't examine these. If you ever done mark to market or any of the three ways to do it, how complicated it is, and how time consuming it is. Imagine an IRS employee new to the job or even experienced to the job, and now they have to sit down and try to figure this out. And the amount of time required to track transaction, to track the transaction is so insane, the IRS simply won't do it. And the other thing too, there's no foreign reporting penalty for the 8621. So why would the IRS spend all this time on something that has no foreign penalty bonanza? There's no reason to do it. All you're going to do is find a tax due. That's not going to be all that interesting. And the person's already going to be reporting tax. They would be reporting on a Schedule D or Schedule B. So what's the point of going ahead and doing this? And it's just crazy that the IRS is allowing this to go on and making it more, there's no tax return preparer oversight. These are higher fees charged to people every year. There's no fees. There's no in-person service. There's difficult online access, and there's no transparency. They won't come out with clear rules. And I mean, there's the whole mythology of it. The whole mythology. Oh yeah. And John, thank you so much for dispossessing me of the mythology that I held, that the 1986 Reform Act was a payoff to Wall Street. And that's why they punish foreign mutual funds. That's complete nonsense. John, thank you we did cover that greatly. So now we get into the final two issues that they have here, the IRS has, and we know, well, here's you don't want to know why you have a hard time hiring, recruiting, and training people. And you know what they left off there? They left off retention. It's like IRS hiring, recruitment, and training. You left off employee retention. Well, when you're making people do ugly things, and there was a great Steely Dan song I love. I'm a fool to do your dirty work. Oh yeah. And you're making these people fools because they are doing the dirty work, the dirtiest work imaginable. They are the actual person who's got to devastate some family. They are the ones who have to punish someone. And that is an awful, awful place to be. And I can tell you that the IRS employees I talk to, with a few exception of the people who would never be able to get a job anywhere else, okay, the people who are good all want to get out because the IRS mission is such a mess and there's such a disconnect between the PR and the reality. The reality is this code is just used to beat up on people who can least afford it. Meanwhile, and I know this for a fact, and this would be something I normally wouldn't say. It gets into the class warfare aspect, but I could tell you this for a 100% fact. I know at least of one incredibly wealthy billionaire family who's completely, or not completely, but is significantly evading taxes. I have the report right here. I have it all right here. And it was laid out to them, to the IRS, every which way. But guess what? The IRS decided not to prosecute. You know why? Because they were big. They were big and they were going to lawyer up and it would make it a hard case. So you know what?
Are those people living in the United States?
These people are. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
That's what I thought. Because we're always, I'm maybe diverting a little bit here, but, you read, still today, academics, so-called academics, are publishing paper after paper where they assume that everybody who lives overseas, if you live overseas, if you go overseas, it's to avoid taxes. If you renounce your U.S. citizenship, it's because you're rich and all you want to do is avoid taxes. Yeah. And what they aren't realize, or what they refuse to realize, because for some reason their brains don't put things together, they know that there are a lot of very wealthy people living in the United States who are not paying taxes. Your report that you just held up is not the only information about that.
Right.
And still they don't put these things together, and they'll still insist that if you're leaving the United States, it must be to not pay taxes. If you're renouncing your citizenship, it must be because you're rich and you don't want to pay taxes.
Right.
But at the same time, there's lots of people who are very wealthy who manage to not only not renounce their U.S. citizenship, but to stay in the country and not pay taxes.
Yes.
So how can you be so sure that that's what all these people overseas, that that's really what's going on? Because there's so many examples they could be following of wealthy people staying in the United States, not renouncing their citizenship and not paying taxes. So many examples they could be following if that was really what they wanted to do.
Yeah. I mean, it's here's a comment here we just got here. According to the Government Accountability Office, the IRS has a particular difficulty bringing on and retaining employees who process returns. For the critical filing season, the attrition rate for workers was 16% compared to the agency's overall rate of 7.5% last year. So, I mean, where it looks like they're getting...
I found that. It was a watchdog group that took a look at the IRS retention rate. Yeah.
I mean, that's just, I mean, they're hemorrhaging employees because, I mean, could you imagine how complicated this is and just how brain deadening it really truly is? I mean, and this is, again, here's the most serious problems encountered by taxpayers. And in every single situation here, we've explained how awful it is if you have income or you live overseas. As your financial center of gravity moves overseas, every single one of these issues you are hammered on in a grotesquely disproportionate fashion. Just every serious problem is encountered by taxpayers. And so this is why we say the only solution, I look at this, the only solution to this is not some carve out of, hey, okay, there's going to be some expats that we're going to say this and we're going to do this. The only solution to this, which would truly help the IRS. I don't know if we want to do that. We probably do, because where we are right now, it's the worst of every world. We have the worst of everything. A brutal IRS that can't be dealt with. And that's the frustration. Hey, look, we used to solve a lot of tax problems. Used to go a lot easier. Now now it's difficult for our services, for most people to afford our services. They still need them. But where else are they going to go? And this is where, you're having people, borrow money from friends because you can't get help from the IRS. You can't get it. And it's even more difficult for us. So that's why I think the only solution, or I'm going to strongly say, is the only reason, the only solution is what Keith's group is about. American expatriates for residency-based taxation, to sever U.S. tax citizenship from tax residency. That would end these horrible problems and actually help the IRS focus their resources on all of this. Look, the IRS has plenty to do. The IRS has plenty to do without wading into the international affairs. And this was something, I got to find this here. There was one quote in here that really, just to kind of get to, okay, yeah, here, by the way, here's all the international taxpayer assistance center locations. If you look at that's Puerto Rico. That's Puerto Rico. There you go. Hey, isn't that something?
I thought that was a great map, to be honest.
Yeah, right.
It's a great map.
A lot of white there.
Right.
I thought the NTA has a sense of humor.
Yeah, that is like, there it is. There it is. If you look, don't miss it. And that's not something. Yep, there it is. Puerto Rico.
And that's
right
for
there.
all Americans living outside the United States. That one little dot.
That one little dot.
Puerto Rico.
Right. Isn't that something?
And I tell you, if I may add to what you said, as far as the only solution is residency-based taxation. But currently, the way things are, and based on, it's interesting, all the people I talk to around the world, they've come up with their own solutions, meaning that I deal with people who have entered the U.S. tax system for whatever reason. They realize they can't navigate two incongruent tax systems, so they cry uncle and they decide to renounce. There are others who cry uncle and say, I'm just stopping filing because I just can't do it anymore. And then there are others that look at that and say, why should I even enter the system, because I'm going to have to deal with all this stuff. So it's almost counterproductive of compliance. They make it so difficult to comply, then how do you get people in to comply? And so how do they do that is by scaremongering. That's my view.
Yeah. That's absolutely what happens, and especially when we look at what the IRS's enforcement capabilities actually are. If it's something they can't do automatically or semi-automatically, it's really something they generally don't do. So a lot, the IRS is claiming to use a lot more AI and just claiming to do a lot more things, and claiming and is doing more audits by correspondence.
But Anthony, what do you mean by? I obviously understand as a basic knowledge what AI is. But how does the IRS use AI? I mean, at least from an American overseas point of view, what would they do? What would be an example of an AI process?
Okay. So
they would do?
So you have to understand, Keith, AI is a magic wand that can solve all your problems.
Got it.
So all you need to do is say, we're using AI and it's going to help us do our job. And that's the magic wand. There you go. There you go. That's it's easy. That's all you need to know. It's a magic wand. It's, in order to use AI, you have to have all of your parameters set up. You have to have your structure set up. You have to know what you're doing. And it seems like they're just sort of like, they're raising their hands like, hey, this is too complicated for us. Let's let the machines decide, because whoa, this is really hard work. And wow. So it seems like they're just offshoring a lot of issues. Now, Keith, we got a comment here from one Bob for all here. U.S. embassies often provide tax assistance sessions for those who can travel to the embassy locations. What do you have to say for that?
Well, some of them do, but they don't have a field office anymore where you can go and schedule an appointment to sit down with someone with the IRS to go over your specific situation. That does not exist anymore. They do, and some of the embassies and consulates, they do like a seminar, if you will, but that's very general. And they don't do it consistently, but they don't have a man or woman, a person on the ground who will help individuals. That no longer exists. Go ahead, Laura.
They used to do things, but with this, I'm quite surprised by that comment. I would want to have a very specific example of that happening in the past year or even 2 years.
2 years,
Because first of all, they don't want people at the embassies or consulates because of security reasons. You can't renew your passport in person anymore unless you
That's true.
certain conditions. They don't want you there. So that they would have some sort of event like that at a consulate or an embassy, I have trouble imagining that.
Yeah.
Unless the event is outside the confines of the U.S. embassy or
Yeah,
consulate.
but to my knowledge, there aren't personnel anymore in the consulates or embassies that would have that expertise or that would be part of their job description. So I would be interested. I'd be very interested to have exact, very recent examples of that happening in the past year or two, because I just haven't heard of that. I'd be interested to know if that is.
Yeah, Bob Farrell, if you do have any, please share those with this. If you have any instances the last time you were there, or someone who got some help, whatever it was, if you could comment on that. I was doing a control find for 66 because when I read this report, the one that you linked, Laura, the compliance abroad, this stuck out to me, the 66 countries. And I just want to read this sentence because I think it's really, really helpful to kind of see what we're all against here. In addition, I am on page 117.
Okay.
So here it is. In addition to intricate statutory rules for the taxation of foreign income of U.S. persons and U.S. income of foreign persons, the United States has bilateral income tax treaties with 66 countries. Okay. So what that actually does is create 67 different possible results for the taxation of someone overseas, because we have to include, what's the possibility if they don't have a treaty. So that's 66 different things that the treaty may really decide. There are 67 ways to tax someone overseas, and I think that's a fair way to put it. Understanding these treaties isn't exactly easy. It's as if they are intentionally complicated with the treaty itself, the treaty protocol, and the technical explanations. And so, you have, because the treaty may say one thing, but the protocols may say something else. And so not only do you need to know what the treaty says, you need to know what the protocol says. And so maybe we need to even double that number. So that is one of the most difficult things that we encounter, is that, the tax treaties can have various interpretations. And then when we get to, of things such as trying to figure out what do you do with a pension overseas, you find, the issue is that, on this issues here, your compliance challenges for taxpayers abroad and really, we're tax return oversight. The IRS keeps these rules intentionally vague. As I mentioned it on the PFIX, but a lot of the tax treatment, they won't really say yes or no a different way, because you know what? Maybe they don't know the answer themselves. So things are intentionally vague. And when you have that amount of tax treaties that are drastically changing the nature of someone's tax, hey, look, a UK tax treaty can block a pension from taxation, but you could be in a different country where it doesn't. And now it's taxable. Talk about a complete change because of these tiny, intricate rules with huge consequences. Oh boy, we're getting close on time. So I think we have some great questions that are going to get us to segue into where this may be going. Got a question from Danny Walker here. What is the consensus if Republicans take the presidency in November? Will the outlook be okay, optimistic for foreign U.S. residents, or more aggressive? And I would say yes. I'm going to say we're going to get the same. Now, look, I am a Republican, and I will probably vote Republican in this election, the next one coming up. But I don't expect for a second that the president who signed into law the Tax Cuts and Job Acts, which created the transition tax, that was President Trump. That was President Trump who signed that piece of crap into law. I don't expect him to give one crap about it. I don't expect any of them. They have what's their incentive to care? They have, every expat is voting in all, their votes are spread out among 335 different districts across the country. And look, it's a great little thing. You know, Democrats abroad, they're always out there saying, hey, expats, make sure you vote in these elections. And they're sending out things as like, oh, look, and it's cultural warfare, things they're sending out there. Hey, look, you're overseas, and the most important issue to you must be what books are allowed in a Florida library.
Exactly.
Right. And that's what, and
Right.
that's what
That'll
they're, and
help
that's
their
what they're,
problem. That will help with their problem.
that's not going to help you. You're voting on the dumb things. And look, you know, in my mind, you know, it used to be that if you were overseas, you couldn't vote in elections, and that changed in 1978. We discussed that at length on a previous podcast. But in my mind, they didn't do that because they were going to help you. They did that because, look, absentee ballots are fantastic if you're looking to commit vote fraud. That's what it's about. That's what it's about. Hey, look, you're looking to swing a tight election. Hey, a little few extra absentee coming in from overseas can certainly have an impact. So I don't believe that the law was actually intended. The law that gave expats the right to vote overseas actually there was actually to give representation. It was to give the impression of representation while denying that representation. And I think Democrats abroad, you know, they're fantastic at, yeah, exactly. Here's a comment that we have here. Danny, that's right. Guilty was 100% Trump, 100%. Sorry. There's no reason why that I trust a Republican or a Democrat. And we need to remember something. The income tax is a Republican idea. It was passed in the law. The first one was passed in law by the great Republican Abraham Lincoln in 1862. The Republicans are the party of the income tax. Sorry. Now, true, the Democrats were the ones that came back in 1913, and Republicans gave up superficial opposition, but boy, when it was there, oh man, all of a sudden the Republican opposition to it went away because of the power that it has. So I don't believe it doesn't matter who you vote for as it is now, because the way the system is, you're designed to be disenfranchised. John, would you add anything to that? Would you say that I'm off on any of that?
Well, I don't think that any of these elected people understand the tax system at all. And I certainly don't think they have any understanding of the problems of Americans abroad. The best case scenario would be for an elected president to appoint a Treasury Secretary with some understanding of these issues, because there's absolutely no question in my mind but that this whole monstrosity can be ended by Treasury regulations. And Laura and I and Karen Alpert wrote something on that a couple of years ago called A Regulatory Fix for Citizenship Taxation. I mean, obviously, it would be better to get a legislative fix, but it's a lot easier to get a regulatory fix. And I think that, you know, I mean, frankly, I think that the message ought to be sent to these presidential candidates that either they commit to directing their future appointee as Treasury Secretary to ending this, and we've got the blueprint for it, or they don't get the votes, plainly and simply.
It doesn't matter. I don't think that's going to work. I mean, I just, no one cares. And I think this kind of leads me to, you know, where we are and why we are here. You know, again, why we are here is because expats' votes are diluted to the point where they're insignificant. Although they can make a difference, in local small races. Overall, you know, they only can be used. But the Democrats abroad have no interest in actually representing people overseas, and I would say that is pretty much for Republicans too. Although they may give more lip service to helping. The actuality is they're not there whatsoever. Well, Danny, I have actually a new business model here. Specialized therapy for U.S. citizens abroad. Well, no, there actually might be something else. And I was just mentioning here, one of the fans of our channel. I talked to him last week, and he's a U.S. expat living in Germany. He said the U.S. expat Facebook group German expat group is pretty big, about 100,000 subscribers. And he mentioned to me, he goes, well, I actually have a solution to this problem. And I'll give you guys a solution. I'm going to be following up more with him about his specific way to make it easier for everyone. But this is something anybody could do right now. That is, if you change your mailing address, and this is really the idea, is the problem is that all expat votes are diluted. But what if they were concentrated? What if expat votes were not diluted across the 435 congressional districts, but actually went into one or two or just a few? And in particular, what if we started with Wyoming? What if, say, 200,000 U.S. expats made their mailing address Wyoming? Well, that 200,000 would be enough to sway the election so that 2 senators and 1 representative would be representing U.S. expats abroad. This would actually give a seat at the table. And as Keith, as you mentioned before, in France, French expats who are living around the world, not just in the U.S., but any French person living around the world has a seat at that table, right? They have a representative.
Yeah, they do. They do. And in fact, in the United States, there's a number of representatives. But yes, around the world, French expats actually have a representative that they can go to. And that representative goes to Paris and sits in the National Assembly so that French expats actually have a voice. And I actually gave a talk in Washington to a group of French expats in regards to a number of different issues, cross-border issues. And there was a representative there who took notes, and he went back to address it with the National Assembly. So yes, they have a voice. They have a seat at the table, which is wonderful.
Right. And I mean, and I think that's really the only way to get it. And now this is also what I would say. This is me, I heard this. I'm like, wait a second, you're saying Wyoming could be basically taken over with 200,000. Well, there's other very low population states as well, like Alaska, Montana, Vermont, where I'm also licensed to practice law. So that might be another place that as we do this. And so really the plan I have is I want to sort of see what will be involved in creating this. And I mean, really, this is where we need everyone's help. This is where we need to say is, and I think we're seeing, as Danny just said, to rationalize the cognitive dissonance of being abused and feeling like a used money tax pumping machine undergoing tax double taxation. And, as long as I have to file with the U.S. as well as my country of residence, I do not think either party is giving me what most countries give your citizens. Absolutely correct. That is what it is. And again, this is what I would, Keith's question here. Historically, how has voting in elections helped Americans overseas and American immigrants with their issues? Examples. And this is why I said before, when we were talking about a previous podcast, I think it would be better if U.S. expats didn't vote, because it's giving the impression that their vote matters. And now I'm changing that to say, no, I do believe every U.S. expat will vote, but it's critical that you are in that there is a critical mass in at least one congressional district where that can get on the table, that this whole thing can matter. Single issues. Wyoming could be a single issue state that we need to end the abuse of the IRS. That's really what it could be. Nothing other than that. Oh, yeah. And here it is. Italy. Monica, thank you very much for that comment. Italy's the same. There are overseas representatives, and then there's various macro regions representative. Wow. I mean, we are guaranteed a Republican form of government, and we're so denied it that you are totally, if you're overseas, you are totally denied the right to vote in a meaningful sort of way. And so that's what we need to do, guys. I'm going to be talking with this fan tomorrow a little bit more about his ideas. He said he created a whole business plan. I'm really curious about that, how to make this. And really the goal here is to make it as easy as possible for every U.S. expat to register to vote in Wyoming. And then maybe we pick a next state. Maybe you want to pick Vermont instead. That would be another one. So that's kind of where
if I lived in one of those states, I wouldn't be real happy about my state being hijacked.
You know what? You know what I would say to that? You know what? Tough. Your state's one of the states causing the problems. If you don't like it, change the law. And if you don't like it, get rid of citizenship-based taxation. If you're tired of people who don't live in your state, dictating who represents, then you know what? There needs to be a change. I get it. I wouldn't like it myself either. But what else are they supposed to do? And all we're going to do here is remove the horrible taxation of the U.S. government, which is, I think, anybody in any state should rejoice at. Finally. And so that's what I'm going to be working towards, because I don't see any other solutions here. I don't see any solutions. I don't see Democrats, Republicans. They're the same party. They're the same party who will always abuse the person overseas because there's never a political consequence to it. That's what needs to change. So I'm going to finish up here, but I want to ask Keith, what do you think of this idea that I have?
It's certainly an idea that's worth exploring. It really is.
Yeah. So, and yeah, if you want to comment on that, please let me know. Absolutely. John, what do you think? Any chance that this idea is decent, good, or could potentially work?
I think it's definitely worth exploring. There are some other states as well. I think South Dakota might be another one.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. And, I think it's important for homeland Americans to understand that the offshore vote is coming.
Right.
And we are our accounts, they're going to have to accept the offshore vote.
There you go. Right. Yeah. Huh?
But some other, I think, interesting ways. I mean, I think that Michigan is a state where Americans abroad could very publicly assist in a very decisive loss for the Democrats. In previous elections, they've been in overdrive marketing for trying to harvest votes in Windsor, Ontario. And I think it might, simultaneously, while expats take Wyoming and rename it Expatia or something, I think that there ought to be a public campaign in Windsor, Ontario to not vote for the Democrats, punish them for FATCA, this type of stuff. Mona, it's worse than King George taxed the colonies. Absolutely. And why it is worse, okay, and why it is completely wrong to actually even draw the analogy between King George taxing the colonies and American citizenship taxation. The British, to their credit, were at least taxing people in their own colonies. What the United States is doing is reaching out and taxing the residents of other sovereign nations. So honestly, to compare the U.S. tax system with King George is, I think, a gross insult to the memory of King George.
Right. The great King George. I mean, right.
Well,
King George III was a reasonable man.
Compared to this,
even though he had mental issues.
There's a difference between mental issues and a form of just, simply pure evil.
Yeah.
And I think that's,
U.S. citizenship, it's not even characterized properly. It's not citizenship taxation. It's imposing taxation on the income earned by people who live in other countries and has no association with the United States.
Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, John. Right on. And by the way, if you are thinking of renouncing your citizenship, it happens a lot. If you're a U.S. person, it's magic of our tax code. You reach out to John at citizenshipsolutions.com. By the way, if you do have a disclosure,
I would actually, if I may add, and John, correct me if I'm wrong, but not only do you deal with renouncing U.S. citizenship, but you also deal with people who need to formally turn in their green card. Is that correct?
Oh yeah, no, that's a much bigger part of what I do.
Right. So it's a twofold thing. Yeah. I just want.
Yeah, I would have meant. Right. Oh, well, we should. Oh, all right. Well, good to know. All right. Yeah. If you have your green card, and yeah, you just can't leave with a green card. You actually have to do things with it in order to stop that.
The governing principle is simply this. Okay, you do not leave the land of the free for free. That's how you need to think about this.
Right on. All right. And so if you are now, if you do have some questions, if you are thinking about, want to just talk to someone who's not a U.S. tax professional, which I don't blame you, you reach out to Keith Redmond. He really, he's running this Facebook group. Now, I mean, are we at 10,000 here? Like how I say we. At
We're
9.7. So close.
97. Yeah.
97, so close, almost there. And really, again, there's a lot of great conversations here. You're going to find, if you're abused by the government, feeling alone, join here. And this is where we all met. This is really where we're all met, and we're getting a lot of views, and a lot of great ideas are coming from here. So join, commiserate together at least.
Why don't you go make a trip to Wyoming and get people to join your group? Okay, and you can put together a slogan. The Redcoats are coming, or something like that.
I think. Well, I think the way to do it is to get a group going, and then issue, hey, look, a threat. Issue the threat. Hey, look, Wyoming, you're going to be taken over by expats, and that will only drive more attention to what's going on and get more people to register.
I think it's a great idea. I'm just from the point of view of
it's the only one I could think of, because otherwise I don't see any other than raising arms against our government. I don't see any other thing that's going to do the trick. There's no representation. That's why everything's so awful. That there's zero representation, and it's all designed this way.
Actually, Anthony, the truth of the matter is that we're sitting here talking about how Americans abroad have no representation. What the truth is? No American citizen has any representation whatsoever. The political process.
Who would vote for this, right?
Is completely dominated by the Republican and Democratic parties. Completely. I mean, you look at what's happening before our very eyes right now. We have essentially a decision on the level of the Democratic Party to deprive the American people of a nominating process for president. I mean, they've just sort of anointed Biden. I'm not taking a position on Biden per se, but I am taking a position on the process. All right. At the very least, the Democrats should not be shielding President Biden from competition. Give him the opportunity to show that he is, in fact, the best candidate for the Democrats. He may very well be, okay, but that's a decision that should be made on the retail level in America, and certainly not on the party level. And and frankly, are the Republicans much better? I don't know. I mean, I don't see any evidence that either party is allowing this issue to be determined on the retail level where it really matters. So, all homeland Americans have to do to understand their future is just look at what's happening with Americans abroad, where it's just more obvious that they're completely excluded from the democratic process. If they think about it, they might very well see that they're also excluded. And, that's a much bigger part of the problem.
Yeah. Indeed. And I think we have to end here. Laura, thank you so much for joining us today. What action would you want people to take today, if any action? What would you want them to do?
Well, I sign up for Seat's mailing list.
Okay.
For sure. Because I think we're going to be putting some things out in the near future, some calls to action in the near future. So the Seat.org, what is it? Seatnow.org.
Seatnow.org. Yep.
Yeah. And go there, sign up for a mailing list,
Okay.
and follow our Facebook page, and then you'll be able to know what's going on from as far as Seat is concerned.
And Anthony, I have a suggestion for you and Simon, or maybe for Laura.
Does it involve a song?
No, but well, actually, no, I have a suggestion for some songs. But what I was thinking was that maybe you could call up Liz Cheney.
Okay.
And just let her know, that the state is going to be taken over by expat through the offshore vote. Yeah.
Right. And here's some from Jack Dack. The expat votes, likely there was expat votes probably, because of Democrats abroad, those were probably a lot of Democrat votes, and it could have provided Biden by his claimed margin of victory. Sorry, I can't believe he actually won. I will be always one of those election deniers who claims that the person who didn't vote, who got 2% of the vote in New Hampshire in the primary, didn't become more popular than Barack Obama overnight. I'm going to just say that. I know I'm going to be a little crazy there. And I just think it's all part of the overall bipartisan theft that they would do it, because they're both out there to deny us what we are entitled to, what we demand. So with that, I want to thank everyone. This is what a fantastic discussion. I mean, we have incredible brain power on this. I'm so fortunate to be part of this community. And I will just say this, that if you do have an offshore disclosure, you have some questions you're looking for, you reach us at irsmedic.com/offshore, or with our new texting function, which doesn't work if you're overseas. I got to get an 800 number for that. So this only works if you're in the U.S. 818-293-4857. Don't do that if you're overseas. It won't work until we get an 800 number for that. You just go here to get going on that. And this is the other thing too. Be sure to subscribe to this channel, okay? Because I will be following this. And also, there was some positive news that came off. John shared this. The Financial Crimes Enforcement Network's other form, the beneficial ownership information form, which was new for 2024, was just deemed unconstitutional. And we hope the same things happens with the FBAR, which does not appear that there's actually an authorization for it. Yeah, go ahead.
On that note, okay, this FinCEN thing being out, that was in the state of Alabama. I think we need to do a podcast on that. Speaking of
absolutely,
song, I'm looking forward to your singing and Sweet Home Alabama.
That's what it's going to be. All right. So Sweet Home Alabama okay. So that will probably be what we're going to be covering next week, is how FinCEN got totally smoked by a federal judge in Alabama. The devil went down to Georgia, right? Or no, wait, no, sorry, wrong state.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. Remember, the DA is claiming victory in Georgia because of the expat vote. Remember that. So yeah, the devil did go to Georgia.
The devil did go to Georgia. So be sure to subscribe to your channel. Turn on those notifications so you know when we go live. We generally do try to do Tuesdays at 7:30, but we often have guests on at other times. And sometimes we're trying to squeeze things in, and then sometimes stories pop up. So again, be sure to subscribe, turn on those notifications so you could be part of the discussion and the solution. This is Anthony Parent for Keith Redmond, Laura Snyder, and John Richardson. Thanks for watching.